Wheel of... No, we're not doing that.
Shut it down.
Did you know that Pat Sajak is actually kind of notoriously an asshole? A little fact for you. Wheel of Fortune. I mean, hit the snooze button, folks, because this is a card that I never really found that interesting. You know, it's weird. It's like, meh, okay. You know, like even artistically, I've always found it kind of ugly. And there are some out there, like you've heard me say, like, oh, I really like that one. It's just like, I don't know. It's just not a card that ever excites me very much, which is weird because, you know, it should be like an exciting card because it's all about like fate and the wheel turning and all of that stuff. But, I mean, hard to impress. But let's talk about the card because we can make anything interesting. And I think there's some cool stuff to talk about with the Wheel of Fortune. Now, one thing that I like about this card that I think is helpful in modern tarot reading is that one of the main themes of it is how we're not always in control, how sometimes situations are what they are and we can't really impact them that much. And the reason that I find this useful in tarot reading is just that there are times in life where that's the reality. And I think one of the things that has happened as tarot has filtered into the mainstream, and even before then, is that tarot has sort of become really about self-empowerment. And it's, I think... Again, it's one of those times where it's like a term that's like, meh. Like, what does it mean? And I think what it means to a lot of folks now is kind of like a spiritual secret. You know what I mean? Like The Secret, not like a secret no one tells you, like the book The Secret. It's like that thing of the power of positive thinking, which I have a lot of problems with. I was at a conference a bunch of years ago for work, and a guy gave a talk. And one of the examples he used, and he was talking about positive thinking, was how he found out that his son had nasal cancer. And it was through the power of positive thinking that his son got better, which infuriated me. It made me so angry because it implies that if you are not a positive thinker, then you are going to die of cancer because you are not positive enough. It's like religious people who think that prayer is the answer to everything. That, you know, if you just pray hard enough, God will save you. And even worse than that to me is people who've like come through something difficult and said, oh, thank God, you know, it was the power of God that did that. Well, okay, what about all those dead kids over there? Like, God just doesn't care about those? They didn't pray hard enough? They didn't think positive enough? Like, sometimes things just are what they are. And I think the Wheel of Fortune is like a tangent I did not expect to go on, by the way. It's not in my notes. But I hate positive thinking, and that really is fine. Like, if you are a naturally positive thinker, good for you. Excellent. There's nothing better than having to not feel anxiety and dread and fear. Like, totally here for you feeling that way. Most of us, though, don't. Most of us experience some kind of anger, dread, and conditions that stop us from really thinking positively all the time, including depression, including socioeconomic factors, racial factors, gendered factors, all of these things that can stand in the way between us and positive thinking. And so to just say, like, oh, positive thinking is like, it's spiritual bypassing. So anyway, this card, the Wheel of Fortune, reminds us that not everything is within our control. Sometimes things are just going to happen, and they're what they are, and they have to be gone through. And it's a reality, you know? I'd love to think that we always have control. We don't. And some people have more control than others because they're in positions of influence or power or financial stability or wealth that allows them a certain amount of autonomy that others of us don't get. So power and positive thinking, these are like inextricably linked. And who gets to have power, who gets to think positively, has a lot to do with their conditions in life. So I'll just say that and then move on. And I think in the last few years, actually, it's been a good example of how sometimes things are just not within our control, like global pandemic, financial crises, climate change. You know what I mean? Like, individual action cannot do a whole lot to change those things. You know, collective action could have and didn't. You know, I think for those of us who have been like wearing our masks and getting our shots and quarantining when we have to, like, to see a world in which other people are not doing that and we have no influence, we have no control over it. To me, that's an experience of the Wheel of Fortune, the sort of feeling of helplessness that sometimes just is because we cannot control every part of our environment, every part of our life, etc. You know, and so this last few years has been kind of a Wheel of Fortune experience for a lot of us because we are relatively powerless in the face of things that conditions that people that don't care about us or just they are what they are. It's frustrating, and it causes a lot of other icky stuff inside of us because we really just want to like shake people and shake the world and say like, care about this stuff, care about your neighbors, you know what I mean? But they don't, and we can't really influence that much. So Wheel of Fortune right there. Another cool thing about this card is that it reminds us that everything's temporary. Even plagues will end eventually, maybe once they've eaten through all of humanity. Anyway, temporary is part of life. There was a documentary about Buddhism and Buddha on PBS a handful of years ago. And there was a really beautiful example that one of the commentators gave about impermanence. And this card makes me think of impermanence because of the temporary nature of it. And the example that she gave was, you have this glass. Someone gives you this beautiful glass, and you love it, and you're so happy you have it, and it brings you so much joy every time you see it. And then someone knocks it off the table, and it shatters, and you're devastated. But she says, if you think about when you get the glass, that the glass is already broken, then every moment that you have with it becomes more beautiful and special because you're able to appreciate it in a different way. And when it does eventually break, you at least have the memory and the mindfulness to have appreciated what was there while it was there. And I think that that's a really beautiful philosophy. It's a really beautiful concept. It certainly helped me a lot in my life kind of understand my own fears of mortality and impermanence and relationships and just people coming and going in our lives. That, the idea of the Wheel of Fortune kind of embodies that. People come and people go. Relationships come and relationships go. These things are ebbs and flows, and they're cycles, and they're wheels, and they turn. And so in the Wheel of Fortune, I think we find that kind of impermanence for sure. And it's helpful to remember that too, and especially when we're going through something bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough to think when you're going through something good, like, oh, this will one day end. But when we're going through something bad, the Wheel of Fortune can do a nice job of reminding us that this too shall pass. However, or whatever that ends up being, it's definitely helpful to sort of have a reminder that it's gonna change. It's gonna end at some point, and things will become different. And so it also reminds me of like changeability, and if you were to pair the Wheel of Fortune with like the Lovers, there's a really interesting thing there about like people who run hot and cold. They're kind of mercurial. They're like into you one day, not the next, and then they're back into you. Or those annoying people who like, they're hot for you by text for a while, and then they disappear because they met somebody or they got into a relationship, and then that ends, and then they're like, oh, hey, what's up? Slide into your DMs. Like the Wheel of Fortune and the Lovers kind of makes me think of that, or even the Two of Cups, if you do that sort of Rider-Waite-Smith situation. So, the changeability of things and people in relationships, if you have the Wheel of Fortune paired with court cards, is that person kind of moody? Are they mercurial? Are they shifting? When you have like a card like the Magician that can sometimes be associated with like sneakiness, are they working you? Is the Wheel of Fortune suggesting that you're being sort of taken for a ride or a turn? You know what I mean? Little subtle connections between cards like that. Really, really fascinating stuff. Sometimes the card just represent wheels. You know what I mean? Like literal wheels, like car tires, bicycle tires, wheels on the bus go round and round. Like, and by wheels, you can even like interpret that like people call their car their wheels, you know what I mean? So like it could represent cars, especially when you're with like the Chariot or something like that, or even like the Six of Wands, a situation where there's like motion, and it could signal things like a flat tire with like a sword, you know what I mean? The Ace of Swords and the Wheel of Fortune, like there's something puncturing that tire. Like, again, it's like, how likely is that to come up in a reading? It depends. But the point isn't so much that all these examples are like relevant all the time. It's that it's the sense of being open to the potential for these things, you know what I mean? And so the Wheel of Fortune with some swords cards might say flat tire, or, some kind of obstacle, some kind of, thing jammed into the wheel that stops progress, because ultimately a flat tire is an obstacle, A spoke in the wheel is an obstacle. And so that's really the salient point there. So the Wheel of Fortune paired with swords could suggest an obstacle of some kind towards a progress you're hoping to make. Do you know what I mean? And so it's really kind of teasing these things out and thinking like, okay, what does this combination suggest? A flat tire, what is a flat tire? It's an obstacle. There's going to be an obstacle to you getting this done. There's going to be an obstacle to you achieving this goal, whatever the case is. Historically, the Wheel of Fortune has kind of a journey that I didn't really know about until I sat down to kind of research and think about the card. And it started sort of like in the Greece sort of world, the sort of Greco-Roman gods, Fortuna. And it was a way of explaining kind of the seemingly random, sometimes cruel nature of fate. There isn't a lot of logic to it. And it's interesting because that ties into what I was talking about earlier about sometimes how we don't have agency, sometimes we don't have opportunity to change the situation. Fate just kind of goes where it wants to. So it ties into that. But I can't separate the politics from anything. And so it got me thinking about Fortuna as the sort of icon of this cruelty of fate. And of course, why does the icon of fate turn out to be a woman? Because of historically misogynistic impressions that women are shifty and sneaky and changeable and moody. And so, again, like missed perceptions or misperceptions could be part of this card if you want to go that far. You know what I mean? The Wheel of Fortune, just going backwards through time, and the misogyny of Fortuna being sort of a moody, shifty woman character, the stereotypical, like a stereotype of that sort of femininity. You could bring that into modern life and say, am I viewing this through a misperception? Am I judging this through a perception that is biased? And again, specific context will yield that. It's not something you're just going to pull out of your bag. If someone is dealing with a situation where there's conflict or they're wondering why someone's gotten something that they feel like they deserve, the Wheel of Fortune might suggest this sort of biased perception of the situation if the cards suggest it. It's all down to context, but you can see how you can sort of reach for these little kernels of things. The card doesn't have to be just one thing. You can say, the Wheel of Fortune comes from Fortuna, and Fortuna was a goddess because people thought women were shifty and sneaky and moody. And that's biased, and so biased perceptions, there you go. In medieval Europe, that allegory kind of changes, and it becomes sort of about the downfall of the powerful. It's less random. The Wheel of Fortune becomes less random in medieval Europe. It says that what goes up will come down, meaning that powerful people will fall, which, in a way comes from sort of Greek drama, the Oedipuses and the fallings of kings. But I think it's interesting because nothing the church does with allegory is entirely innocent. And I don't have, proof the theory I'm about to share is correct, but I've been around the block enough to know that there's benefit to people in power in keeping the masses content and afraid of power and happy to be poor and happy to keep their place. And so if you use an allegory to teach people that when they are ambitious and powerful, God will smite them down, it's more likely to keep them in their place and keep you in your place as the teller of that allegory, even if you never eventually fall. It's a way of manipulating people into believing something that is or isn't true in order for you to maintain status and power. And so that's an interesting reading of the card too. Again, you're not going to just pull this out of the bag. It's going to be like you're seeing kings, the emperor, the Hierophant in partnership with the Wheel of Fortune, and you're remembering there was this video I watched and this guy said this thing about how the allegory of the Wheel of Fortune became this way to keep people down or keep poor people from being too ambitious. And then you're like, you're manipulating the situation to your own benefit. That's what I'm talking about there. But it's an interesting thing, right? And so this is what I'm always encouraging you to do is look beyond, look deeper, go to the dictionary, go to Wikipedia, explore these things and say, how does this tie into life? So that when you're in a reading, it just sort of opens you up. And that's the whole point of this series. As I say every week. Another thing that I thought about as I was working on my notes for this video, is that we know that the wheel implies movement. It's clearly turning, but we don't know how fast. And so I thought, you can probably tell how fast something is turning by the numbers that are around it. And so if you have a lot of aces and twos, it's probably turning really slowly. And if you have a lot of like tens and nines, it's turning much faster, and including as you go further up with the majors, right? So you could think about the speed of the wheel in terms of the cards that are around it by number. And so if you're wondering how long something's going to take or how long a state is going to continue, if there's a lot of ones or twos, it's going to be a while because it's going to take some time to turn. If it's nines and tens, then it's going to happen pretty fast because the wheels are turning pretty quick. So that's another way to sort of think about speed when it comes to timing, which is a topic I don't talk about too much. But another thing too, directionality is really important to me in reading, and I haven't really done much with that in this series. Just doesn't come up. But if you think about the way the wheel sort of depicts someone rising and someone falling, if you have cards on either side of it, you could say that sort of what's on the left of it is coming up and what's on the right of it is going down. Or even if you have a spread and you need some additional information, you could put a card above and below it to see what's on top and what's below it.
Who's on top and who's on bottom now?
Sort of what's rising, what's in position of power, and what's being trampled on or isn't in power at the moment. So again, little ways that positioning and stuff can help you sort of use the wheel in a reading to find some interesting things. There's also some consideration that the Wheel of Fortune as an idea comes from the zodiac. And so you could use the card to sort of represent the idea of the zodiac, whatever that means to you, whatever astrology means to you as a concept. You know what I mean? Again, this sort of ability to use the sky to understand and make sense of what seems unmakesensible, or whatever your metaphor for astrology is. The Wheel of Fortune can suggest astrology, can suggest the zodiac, because there's some evidence that the concept actually comes from the cycle of the sky. And again, that was just another interesting thing. I don't work much with astrology, but, if you're in a reading and that comes up and you're like, astrology can help us make sense of things, in the same way a tarot reading can, the Wheel of Fortune could suggest trying to make sense of things that don't make sense using some kind of divination system or astrology, etc. So as I said, what I'm really hoping to do is open you up and make you feel more responsive, receptive to what the cards could mean in the context of a reading. And I started to think about like going to an art gallery. Like, if you're really enjoying art, you're not going into the art gallery and saying, this is what this painting means. Ideally, you would let the painting tell you what it means. You'd experience the painting. You'd look at a Rothko or a Monet or whatever and sort of feel it and say, I'm getting these reds, these Rothko reds, and that makes me feel angry, and my mood is this today. And, you could go into an art gallery a bunch of times and you'd be a different person each time. And so the context of the paintings might make you feel different things because you're different on that day. The painting doesn't change, you are. The situation changes. So I think of it that way. It's like, yes, you can have a sense of what the artist meant, which is sort of what is depicted on the card, but you also have a sense of how you experience it in the context of that day, that gallery, that lighting, that mood, etc. So it's about kind of experiencing it and being open to it rather than forcing it to do something that it may or may not want to do that day. So we're about halfway through. I'm really impressed with myself for getting this far. Like, with what a year it's been. Like, I was like, I started this and I thought I'm never gonna have the energy to finish, and who knows, anything could happen. What a fucking time we're living in. But patting myself on the back for getting this far. So next week we're gonna talk about the Hanged Man, right? Because we already did Justice. So the Hanged Man has some interesting stuff going on. So that's gonna be fun. All right, have a good week. Take care. We'll talk soon. Be good. Yes.
Shut it down.